October 21st, 1984. Vienna, Austria. 10:15 a.m. The Kartnerstrasse was alive. The sidewalks were teeming with tourists. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly roasted coffee, and the melody of street violins drifted from every corner. It looked like a picture-perfect postcard. But beneath this veneer of European charm, an invisible war was raging. Cut to Langley, Virginia. CIA headquarters. Deep inside the bowels of the building, in a windowless, air-conditioned vault, sat Karen Whitfield. Dark circles rimmed her eyes. Before her lay a sprawling mosaic of black and white surveillance photos. The only light in the room came from the harsh glare of a lightbox on her desk. In her hand, she gripped a heavy jeweler's loupe. Karen wasn't a James Bond. She had never fired a gun, never worn a disguise, and never jumped out of a plane. Her weapon was her eyesight and an infinite reserve of patience. She was an image analyst. Her job was to hunt for the needle in the haystack that everyone else missed. Today's assignment was grunt work. Routine surveillance on a suspected KGB courier in Vienna. Field agents had snapped dozens of shots of the target from a distance. Karen's job was to confirm if the courier had made contact with anyone. The first 100 photos were a bust. The courier walking, sipping espresso, reading a newspaper. Boring. Karen stifled a yawn, took a sip of cold coffee, and slapped photo number 101 onto the lightbox. At first glance, it was nothing special. The courier was standing in front of a high-end department store. The display window behind him was dressed with expensive leather wallets and perfumes. The courier was looking straight at the camera, seemingly alone. Karen was about to sweep the photo into the cleared pile. But then, her hand froze. She raised the loupe to her eye, leaning in until her nose almost touched the print. She focused not on the man, but on the plate glass window behind him. The glass was acting like a mirror. It held a reflection of the street across from the store. It was blurry, distorted, and inverted, a ghostly echo of the world behind the camera. Cars, trams, pedestrians, all floating upside down in the glass. Karen zoomed in mentally. Her heart rate ticked up a notch. In the corner of that reflection, amidst the crowd, there was a silhouette. A man standing partially obscured by a lamppost. He was wearing a charcoal gray overcoat. He was looking directly at the courier, but his posture was that of a man trying very hard to be invisible. Karen held her breath. She studied the face. The film grain was heavy, but the structure of the jawline and the rigid military stance were unmistakable. She shot up from her chair and yanked a top-secret folder from the filing cabinet. She flipped through the pages until she landed on a passport-sized headshot. Name: Yuri Malenkov. Status: high-ranking KGB General. Current location: Moscow. Confirmed. Karen looked back at the lightbox. The blurry ghost in the window reflection matched the file photo perfectly. Malenkov was supposed to be in Moscow, safe behind the Kremlin walls. So why on earth would a KGB general be standing on a dusty street corner in Vienna, personally tailing a low-level courier? Generals don't do foot surveillance. Unless the stakes are nuclear. Karen didn't know it yet, but she had just cracked open Pandora's box. That single reflection, that smudge on a piece of glass, was about to unleash a cyclone on the CIA operations floor. Because Yuri Malenkov wasn't just a KGB officer. The CIA believed he was their asset, a double agent working for Washington. But this photo screamed a different story. Pictures don't lie. Karen reached for the secure phone line. Her finger trembled as she dialed. She knew that by making this call, she was signing a death warrant. The only question was, whose? Malenkov's? Or the dozens of CIA agents whose names Malenkov might have already sold to Moscow? The Russia House, CIA headquarters. The conference room of the Soviet division was thick with cigarette smoke. Senior officers sat around the heavy oak table like a jury at a murder trial. Projected onto the wall, looming large and grainy, was Frame 101. The silence in the room was suffocating. Every pair of eyes was locked onto that tiny, ghostly reflection in the shop window. "Are you sure, Karen?" Robert Sanders, the division chief, asked over the rim of his glasses. There was less skepticism in his voice than pure dread. Karen stood up. She clicked her laser pointer, a red dot dancing on the blurry face. I'm 90% sure, sir. Look at the earlobe. And the posture of his right hand, he's got it jammed in his pocket, but the thumb is hooked outside. Every file photo we have of Malenkov shows that exact same habit. Sanders leaned back, rubbing his temples. He knew Karen's eyes didn't lie, but his brain refused to accept it. Yuri Malenkov, the CIA's golden goose. For 3 years, Malenkov had been feeding them the KGB's crown jewels. Based on his intel, the agency had run dozens of ops across Europe. They trusted him like a brother. They had spent millions keeping him safe. And now, Malenkov in Vienna? Off the reservation. If that is Malenkov, a counterintelligence officer muttered darkly, then we have a catastrophic breach. Our last report has him bedridden in a Moscow hospital with pneumonia. The tension in the room curdled into fear. If Malenkov had lied to them, he wasn't a double agent. He was a triple agent. He had been playing the CIA to serve the KGB's agenda, feeding them chicken feed while sucking real intel out of Langley to send back to Moscow. Sanders slammed his hand on the table. I need proof. Activate Vienna station immediately. Trace that courier. And Karen. He turned his gaze on her. Process that image. I want 100% confirmation on that face. I don't deal in maybe, or looks like. Cut to the darkroom. Karen was back in her element. The magnifying glass was gone. Now, she was using the cutting edge of digital enhancement tech. On her monitor, pixels slowly sharpened. Shadows retreated, revealing the truth hidden in the gray. The night wore on. Karen's eyes burned, but she didn't blink. She knew that if this man really was Malenkov, the life of every CIA asset in Europe was hanging by a thread. 0400 hours. Processing complete. Karen pulled the fresh printout from the tray. There was no doubt. The broad forehead, the predatory gaze. It was Yuri Malenkov, but the horror didn't stop there. He wasn't alone. Standing next to him, previously hidden in the blur, was a second figure. The digital enhancement brought his face out of the shadows. Karen's blood ran cold. The second man wasn't Russian. He was American, a junior case officer from the CIA's own Vienna station. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't just caught a traitorous Russian. She had just identified a mole inside the agency. Malenkov hadn't come to Vienna to watch a courier. He was there to meet his handler, but not his authorized handler. It was a setup, a rogue operation, and Karen Whitfield, sitting in a dark room in Langley, was staring at the blueprint of the betrayal. The secure phone on her desk rang. This time, Karen didn't hesitate. She picked up the receiver. Sir, I have confirmation. And the situation is worse than we thought. Cut to Vienna. Dawn had not yet broken over the city. In a plush hotel room, Yuri Malenkov sipped vodka, staring out at the sleeping streets. He thought his game was perfect. He had no idea that thousands of miles away, his own reflection in a shop window was already hunting him down. The predator was about to become the prey. The ops room, Langley. The floor was buzzing like a war room. Karen's second photo, the one pinning Malenkov next to the junior CIA officer, was the game changer. The junior officer was David Larson, a young, ambitious agent stationed in Vienna. But it was becoming painfully clear that his ambition had been weaponized against him. Larson wasn't a KGB mole in the traditional sense. He was a pawn. Malenkov was playing him, convincing the kid that he was running a deep cover ops for the good of the agency that had to be kept off the books. Sanders made the call instantly. We don't touch Larson. Not yet. We use him. The plan was ruthless but effective. The CIA would send Larson an urgent comms burst. The message, Malenkov's cover is blown. A new safe house has been prepped. Move him tonight. In reality, that safe house didn't exist. It was a trap laid by the CIA's Special Operations Group. Vienna, 1900 hours. Rain lashed the cobblestone streets. David Larson walked fast, collar turned up against the wind. He was jittery. The sudden order from HQ had rattled him, but he was desperate to save his hero, Malenkov. Larson ducked into a phone booth and dialed the secure number. Trouble in the Eagle's Nest. He spoke in code, his voice tight. We need to switch coops. Tonight at 2200. Under the old bridge. On the other end, Malenkov paused. Did his veteran spy instincts smell a rat? Or was his control over Larson so absolute that he didn't suspect a thing? Agreed, Malenkov said curtly. The line went dead. Back at Langley, Karen Whitfield was still at her desk. She wasn't done. She had a map of Vienna spread out in front of her, analyzing the topography around the old bridge. Her gut told her Malenkov wouldn't go down easy. A shark like him always had an exit strategy. She scrutinized the satellite imagery. The meet spot was under the bridge, but 100 yards away lay a ventilation shaft for the U-Bahn metro. And right next to that, a narrow alleyway leading directly to the Danube Canal. Karen grabbed the phone. Sir, warn the extraction team. If Malenkov senses a trap, he won't fight at the bridge. He'll bolt for the canal. There could be a boat waiting. Sanders didn't argue. He trusted her instincts. He ordered Alpha Team to secure the bridge and Bravo Team to lock down the canal bank. 2,200 hours. The underside of the old bridge was pitch black, the silence broken only by the lapping of river water. David Larson stood there, clutching an umbrella, checking his watch every 10 seconds. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. Yuri Malenkov, no umbrella, hands deep in his overcoat pockets. David, Malenkov said calmly, where is the car? Before Larson could answer, Malenkov froze. His eyes narrowed into slits. There was no sound, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. His sixth sense was screaming. He looked into Larson's eyes and saw the one thing a spy can never hide: fear. You sold me out, Malenkov whispered. Click. Alpha Team's floodlights blinded them. Federal agents. Hands in the air. Malenkov spun on his heel with the speed of a viper. He ran. Not toward the bridge, but toward the canal. Karen's prediction was dead on. Bravo Team was ready. But Malenkov wasn't alone. From the shadows of the treeline, muzzle flashes erupted. Malenkov's backup, KGB snipers, had been lying in wait. Chaos broke loose. A firefight in the rain. Larson hit the dirt, shaking violently as bullets chewed up the ground around him. Malenkov reached the canal bank. The roar of a speedboat engine cut through the night. He braced himself to jump. Freedom was just a few feet of water away. But he didn't know that Karen Whitfield had noticed one other tiny detail in those photos. Malenkov's shoes. They weren't standard issue. They had a slightly elevated orthopedic heel, compensation for an old injury that made running on slick surfaces treacherous. Malenkov leaped, but on the wet, muddy grass, that special heel betrayed him. He slipped, his leg buckled, and he crashed face first into the mud. The speedboat peeled away, its driver aborting the extraction as CIA rounds zipped across the water. Malenkov lay in the muck, gasping for air. Within seconds, agents swarmed him, weapons drawn. He looked up at the rainy sky and smiled, a bitter, twisted grin. He realized he hadn't been beaten by a gun or a bomb. He had been beaten by his own carelessness. A bad pair of shoes and a reflection in a shop window halfway across the world. Langley. The radio crackled in the ops room. Package secured. We got him. Karen slumped back in her chair, letting out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 12 hours. Relief washed over her. Malenkov was in custody, but the real game was just starting. The debriefing of a KGB mastermind would be a war of its own. And David Larson? His career was over before it began. But at least he was alive. Karen looked at the grainy photo one last time, the blurry reflection that started it all. In the world of shadows, the truth is always there. You just have to know where to look. The interrogation room was sterile. Soundproof walls. A single metal table bolted to the floor. On one side sat Yuri Malenkov, cuffed to the chair. His expensive overcoat was caked in Danube mud, but his eyes still held a flicker of arrogance. Opposite him sat the CIA's chief interrogator. A reel-to-reel tape recorder spun silently on the table. We have everything, Yuri, the interrogator said calmly. He fanned the photos Karen had processed across the metal surface. He tapped the one with the reflection, the undeniable proof of Malenkov's face in the glass. Malenkov stared at the images. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Impressive, he said, his Russian accent thick. I thought one of my own sold me out, but I was brought down by a piece of glass? Is that American technology, or just dumb luck? It's not luck, Yuri. It's good analytics, the interrogator replied. He leaned in. Now tell me, which agents did you burn? Who did you feed to Moscow? The psychological warfare began. At first, Malenkov was a stone wall, but the CIA knew his pressure point. They informed him that the KGB had already written him off as dead or compromised, and that the paperwork to ship his family to a gulag in Siberia was already being processed. Malenkov broke. He realized his masters had abandoned him. His only lifeline now was the stars and stripes. Over the next 48 hours, Malenkov gutted the KGB's European operations. He gave up names, safe houses, drop zones. Dozens of sleeper cells were exposed. It was one of the single greatest intelligence coups in Cold War history. Meanwhile, in a holding cell in Vienna, David Larson sat with his head in his hands. His career was ashes. He wasn't charged with treason. He hadn't leaked intel maliciously. He was just a useful idiot, a puppet on Malenkov's string. But the agency has no room for fools. He was dishonorably discharged. Larson would carry that stain for the rest of his life. The man who hugged the enemy thinking he was a friend. Conclusion: the silent hero. Langley, Virginia. Weeks later, Karen Whitfield was back at her desk. The office buzzed with routine activity. No one knew that this quiet woman had single-handedly pulled the agency back from the brink of catastrophe. Division Chief Robert Sanders walked up to her cubicle. He slid a small, plain envelope onto her desk. "What's this, sir?" Karen asked, looking up. "It's not a medal, Karen," Sanders said softly. "We don't give medals in our line of work. It's just a letter from the director and a week of mandatory leave." Karen smiled, tucking the envelope into her drawer. In front of her, a fresh stack of surveillance photos was already waiting. Berlin, Prague, Budapest, thousands of faces, thousands of shadows. She clicked on the light box. She raised the loupe to her eye. Malenkov was history now, but the war wasn't over. As long as there were reflections in shop windows, as long as men hid in the shadows, people like Karen Whitfield would be watching. Camera pans out. We leave Karen at her desk and pull back to see the entire floor. Hundreds of analysts, hunched over their work, searching for the truth in the grain. They aren't James Bonds. They don't wear tuxedos, but their eyes are America's first line of defense. Fade to black. Text appears on screen. The world of espionage isn't just about guns and gadgets. It is the world of seeing. And sometimes, a single photograph is more powerful than 1,000 bullets.